Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at this PowerMac G4. Now I've always had a bit of a soft spot for these machines. You could argue that this sort of styling with translucent plastics and overly curvaceous frames has aged terribly, but there's something so quintessentially 90s about it. So when my mate Richard's mum offered to give me this one that she used to use for her publishing business, I welcomed it with open arms. Let's take a closer look together. So this model is model number M5183, introduced in August 1999, and was one of the earliest G4 PowerMacs to be released. It has a 450 MHz G4 processor included, indicating that this machine is based on the Sawtooth architecture, which did away with the PCI-based graphics of the G3 and the entry-level G4 PowerMac, and replaced it with a 2x AGP slot instead. A lot of the design cues from the earlier G3 PowerMac line have been adopted here, with the rounded bulbous form and these clear plastic protruding handles which were functional as well as aesthetic. Not only did they allow the machine to be picked up and moved around easily, but I've also read that they were designed for noise isolation with only 2 limited points of contact on the desk or floor. To the front you've got this translucent blue-grey front panel which obscures the optical drive here at the top, as well as the floppy drive a little further down. Wait, no, that's not a floppy drive, it's a zip drive. I'd forgotten that while Apple officially gave up on the floppy on the 1998 iMac, that didn't mean that they were done with magnetic media. And this PowerMac came as standard with an iOmega zip drive for moving data around. That's an interesting gamble because it wasn't long after this period that most people and businesses began the transition to writable optical media and then to flash USB storage not long after. Let's not test whether that works just yet though, lest we potentially end up with a zip disk stuck inside the machine. Beneath that you've got this full range speaker which will be connected to the built-in sound card. This was always a curious one for me with this class of device. Presumably those buying a PowerMac new in this period would have been largely working professionally with media, be it video or audio. So why would those sorts of persons rely on a piddly built-in speaker located inconveniently below their desks? It's not a situation unique to Apple. My Dell Precision 690 suffers the same design, and the speaker in that machine is terrible to boot. Below that is the power button, and then at the bottom here you have the reset button and the programmer's button, which was used for debugging prior to OS X. I don't know about you, but if my PC had a button on the front specifically for helping me when it went wrong, I would worry somewhat. Round to the side you have this glorious high gloss plastic finish with the grey Apple logo popping out of the side of it. It really is an incredible design, and if you disagree, you're wrong. Admittedly, this style of design hasn't aged particularly well, but back when it was new, this was just groundbreaking, and best of all, British. That's right, American viewers, we're claiming this as a win for your former imperial overlords. Tough luck. This one hasn't fared too badly, but it's been sat in Richard's mum's garage for at least the last 15 years, so it's got a fair bit of dust on it, which we'll take care of once we know it works. Round to the back, you've got the power supply up the top here, and you could be forgiven for thinking it's almost ATX standard. It certainly looks to be more or less the same form factor at first glance. It's got a standard C13 plug for the mains power input, and it can pass that through to a monitor via this C13 socket as well. Alongside that you've got the built-in I/O. There's 2 FireWire 400 ports at the top. Beneath that you've got the RJ45 socket for the built-in network controller, and then dual USB 2.0 ports for peripheral devices. Beneath that you've got your discrete 3.5mm jacks for speakers and microphone, and slightly further over the optional V92 modem for those still stuck on dial-up internet. Next, you have a series of expansion bays, and you can see that ours has a discrete GPU with a standard 15-pin VGA connector, alongside this ADC or Apple Display connector on the back as well. This took the DVI standard and added lanes for USB signalling, as well as power to feed a connected monitor. The idea being that you just need the one cable to your ADC connected monitor to power it, send the video signal, and allow additional USB devices to be connected to the PC via ports on the side of the monitor. It was an expensive solution for most, as it meant the convenience of having a single cable going to your monitor meant shelling out on a more expensive Apple branded unit. Or else you were resigned to using whichever VGA monitor you had to hand and putting up with it not looking the part next to your gorgeous PowerMac. That won't be a problem for us though, as Richard's mum has also sent along this rather hefty 17-inch display, the last CRT display that Apple produced back in 2002. Now, I don't think this would have been the original display that shipped with this PC. I suspect it was purchased slightly later, as its aesthetic is much closer to the later G4 PowerMacs, which had a more silver colour scheme to them, which would have matched this monitor a lot more closely. You can see why this period was the death knell for CRT monitors though. There's no camera trickery employed here, that's actually how deep this monitor is. And at 17 inches it's not exactly offering good value in terms of required desk space. But it's what came with this machine, so it's what we're going to use. So with that, it's time to start the long drawn out process of getting this machine open. Oh, well, that's not so bad actually. Well done year 2000 Apple. Surprisingly, it's not that dirty inside. There's a fair degree of dust on upward facing surfaces, but it's certainly not bad, and leads me to think the machine wasn't used for very long before it was replaced. A quick blow outside with the air duster is more than enough to get this thing back to its best. So with that done, let's take a look around. To the top here, you have the original optical drive and zip drive in the front drive cage. These are both IDE drives and the cables are neatly squirreled away, and we'll see where they go shortly. Towards the back of the machine you have the power supply, which I was particularly relieved to see was made by AC Bell. In the limited research I did on this machine, it transpires there were two models of power supplies shipped in this machine. The other, produced by Samsung, was notorious for leaky capacitors and had a tendency to take out the motherboard when it released its magic smoke. Beneath that you've got this 120mm fan, which I believe is set to suck heat away from the motherboard and then pass it out the back of the machine via an air channel between the metal chassis and the outer plastic cover. This pushes air out the back of the machine via these holes next to the I/O area. Moving down to the base of the machine, and you can see we have space for up to 4 hard disks. 2 in this stacked mounting point at the back, and a further 2 in the middle and towards the front. You'll notice though that we only have a single IDE channel here at the base of the board, so I assume that if you wanted more hard disks in this system, you'd need to invest in an expansion card to give you additional IDE channels. You'll also notice that we currently have no hard disk in this system. Seeing as Richard works in IT, he was adamant that I couldn't have the hard disk from his dear old mum's computer, which is a very sensible precaution actually. Well done Richard. It won't be a problem though, as any IDE hard disk will work in this machine just fine, so I'll source something suitable later. Moving around to the motherboard section, and you can see the entire system board is mounted on the inside of the hinged door. This gives excellent access around the board without having to disassemble the machine any further. Well done again, Apple. Towards the top end of the board you have 4 SD-RAM DIMM slots. These can each take up to a 512MB PC100 RAM card, giving an officially supported maximum of 2GB. We only have a single 128MB stick in the machine at present. We'll have to remedy that. Beneath that you've got the 450MHz CPU underneath this large aluminium heatsink. Technically, I suppose that makes this machine passively cooled, though in reality that case fan will be used to suck away all of that heat and create airflow over the fins on the heatsink. On the underside of the board here, you've got the secondary IDE channel, which is where the optical drive and zip drive connect to the system. And then next to that, there's what I initially mistook for a SCSI connector, but when I looked again, I realised it was for the PC card adapter for the original Apple Airport Wi-Fi card, which unfortunately we don't have. Behind that card slot, you've got the expansion bays. We have a single 2x AGP slot and then 3 PCI-X expansion card slots, and we've only got the AGP slot populated. Our graphics card in this machine is the ATI Rage 128 Pro with a GPU clock speed of 166 MHz and 32 MB of SD RAM on board. You might notice it also has this additional connector here next to the AGP connector. This was to provide the power necessary to drive the monitor via the ADB connector, which explains why it's such a thick slither of copper and why the corresponding connector on the motherboard is suitably beefy. Lastly, down at the base of the motherboard, you've got that IDE connector for the hard disk, and we've also got the PRAM battery, which looks like it's leak-free in this instance, but I'll get a replacement ordered in any case, as this one is likely dead. Luckily, the motherboard looks to be in really good shape. None of the capacitors are showing any signs of leaking or expansion on the tops, so I'm going to throw in this 40GB hard disk from my iMac G3, and we'll tempt fate and see if the machine works. Well, that's a really positive step. It seems like this system works just fine, and with it booted into OS X Panther, we can see that actually we have a dual GeForce CPU setup, which, now that I think about it, might be what this MP notation in the specs label means. So that's all great, and I'd love to go ahead and look at some upgrades to the hardware and the software. But before we go ahead and change anything on this system, I think it's time we give it some TLC and see if we can get it looking a bit nicer. As I've been floating around this machine for the last couple of days, I've noticed more and more imperfections that a quick dust just isn't going to take care of. So it's time to strip this thing down and give those plastics a more thorough treatment. And the methods I'm looking to use are unorthodox, to say the least. So hopefully you'll agree this looks a lot better now. It's not perfect, but how could it be given how susceptible these translucent plastic materials are to bumps and scratches? That said, for a 22-year-old machine, it looks pretty damn good, and does justice to the design choices Mr. Ive went with all those years ago. To be honest, the machine in general wasn't as dirty as I was expecting. There was a bit of dust around the fans, but other than that, internally it was all looking fine, so the MG chassis got a quick hoover and dust. The outer panels were where I spent most of my time on this refurbishment, as they were covered in small dings and impressions in the plastics. The panels that had that slightly rough finish, I wasn't really able to do much with other than give them a clean. But the high gloss plastics, that's where I was able to make them shine. Pun definitely intended. To get the surface scratches out the plastics, I used progressively higher grades of wet and dry sandpaper, up to a grade of 5000 right at the end. Doing this carefully allowed me to take care of most of the deeper scratches on the side panels, and even this particularly annoying one right across the Apple logo. Once all the sanding was done, the scratches were more or less removed, but then the whole panel had these hazy patches and they just weren't as smooth as they should be. So I did what any self-respecting nerd would do and reached for the power tools. This buffer attachment for my drill, along with this automotive cut and polish compound, really did bring the panels up a treat. And as you can see, while kindly ignoring my daughter's pyjamas and the fact that I need to mow the lawn, it's brought them up to a mirror shine, just like they would have been when they left the factory 22 years ago. There are still some scratches there, but you've really got to look for them, and I can live with that. I also struggled to find a solution to the missing rubber feet on the bottom legs. Originally, this whole recessed bit would have had a solid rubber pad for noise isolation and vibration dampening, but they've liquefied and fallen off as 20-year-old rubber compounds do, so for now I'm just putting a few foam dots in the gap to stop this thing scratching up my desk too bad. So we've now got the machine set up on the bench, and you'll note that the 17-inch Apple CRT is conspicuous by its absence. Unfortunately, while I was testing, I found that it was arcing quite badly, and that likely means that it needs a new flyback transformer, which I'll need more time to source and install. So for now, we're just using this old HP LCD over VGA, and I'll thank you for joining me in pretending it's an Apple CRT. For this build, I've gone ahead and installed the latest version of OS X that supports this CPU, 10.4 Tiger from April 2005, and it looks fantastic on that display. The only other change I've made was to upgrade the RAM to 512MB using some spare sticks of SD RAM for my drawer of memories. This isn't an approved way of storing memory chips, by the way. I definitely need to get round to sorting that drawer out at some point. Amazingly, everything on this machine seems to work just fine, with the exception of the zip drive, which has a solid green light, which Google tells me means that the load mechanism inside has probably failed, and the drive thinks it has a disk inserted at all times. If I do insert a disk, it doesn't show up in OS X, and the eject button doesn't work either. I have to resort to poking a paperclip in the back of the drive to get the disk back out. That small issue aside though, everything is working just fine. Time to try out some games. So those all work beautifully, but ultimately no one goes out to buy a vintage Mac to play games. They're just not well suited to it. I also found, inevitably, that this machine is not well suited for use in 2022. Not only is it quite slow to use, even with the dual 450MHz processors, but it also can't do much in terms of web browsing, even with a modern browser installed. Still, no one is expecting this to be a usable machine in 2022. I'm just really happy I've been able to spend some time with this one and get it looking its best. And it will probably be my go-to machine for retro Mac related content going forward. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been an absolute blast for me to take this thing to bits and give it the attention it deserves. And I hope you agree it was worth it. If you've got any thoughts on this machine or memories of your own Mac from this era, then I'd love to read about them in the comments below. So drop me a message and I'll get back to you. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Please like this video if you've enjoyed it and subscribe to see more content like this from me. And I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.